for.
Well, and the heat is in part generated by what people are saying about the enormous effects of this carbon tax. Now, we haven't got a number on the carbon tax yet. We don't know what its effects are going to be. We know that the government, because they're not, completely stupid, are going to compensate households fairly comprehensively. We know that last time the CPI effect was between 1 and 1.5%. So I think people are responding to what they're being told, which is that you're going to be hugely worse off.
In fact,
when that may in fact not even be the case.
When
they will
the
be
GST
somewhat
came in, after compensation, prices went up by well over 4%, right? In this case, before any compensation, the main figure there was about 1% on a $25 a tonne.
Wayne Swan had an interesting new line on the whole thing this morning on the Nine Network. We'll have a look at that now.
It will operate with a fixed price, which is described by some as a carbon tax. It is not operating in a way where the government goes in and takes the money out of pay packets and puts it in the revenue.
In other words, it doesn't come out of the pay packets, it's imposed on a small number of large polluters, but nevertheless, the large polluters, electricity power companies, pass it on down the line.
And if people's power bills go up, if electricity prices go up for consumers as a result of a price on carbon, people will feel it as a tax and people will call it a tax. But Wayne Swan's quite right. I mean, the interesting thing about that is it took the government now 9 days, 10 days to come up with that response to the carbon tax line. I sometimes get the impression that this government doesn't actually war game things before they do them. They come out days later with, do you want to have a briefing by our economics people about the real impact on electricity?
They're not really...
Now that would have been handy on day one, not on day 7 or something.
Even on the ABC news site, there was someone saying on day 1, I tell you how this is going to work, it's going to come out as a tax out of your pay packet. Now, that was politely put. It was wrong. I mean, there are a lot of things that are factually wrong these days on blogs and that. I mean, you almost think, the end of the Enlightenment's here, because no one cares about facts anymore. They just say anything. But they should have corrected that on day 1. At least that was politely put. A lot of it's put incredibly, nastily.
Couldn't they, Dennis, have finessed the situation a little so that this big lie thing wasn't such a dominant story, and that right from the beginning?
Yeah, this is one of the sort of hardest things to understand. They would have known that when Julia Gillard did her press conference in the courtyard with all of the others, that she was immediately going to be accused of breaking a promise and lying before the election. They knew what she said. There should have been an opportunity where she could have made a speech about how the changing environment and what's going on in terms of trying to get a policy on carbon tax.
Soften them up a bit.
And soften them up a bit. And she could have said, look, I know I said this before the election, but now we're actually thinking about a carbon tax and we'll see where it goes. But instead you just come out and drop it. And of course, you're then immediately open to a legitimate charge that you've broken a promise.
Although, I've got to say, I agree with you on the politics, but she'd have known before the election that the only way she was going to get a carbon price through this parliament, even if it was just with the Greens in the balance of power in the Senate, was to have a fixed price in the first instance, because that's the only way that Labor and the Greens can get around the point of intractable difference between them, which is the ultimate ambition of the scheme.
Yeah,
so she must have known when she said no carbon tax that, in fact, if she was going to do anything, if she won government, it was going to have to start with effectively a carbon tax and put off that decision about the ultimate cap, the ultimate ambition of the scheme, because that's the only way that Labor and the Greens could work together.
I find the politics very odd here. I can't understand why she's brought this storm down on her head by saying we'll introduce a tax, and then saying but we'll take the tax away before any of its benefits, which are quite clear for business, price certainty.
Yeah, and that's not clear in the minds of a lot of people either. It's a temporary tax.
Yeah, but I think they would have been better if you're going to talk about it at all. What business would like, if you're going to have it, is on for 10 years. BHP's made that clear. They need the price certainty, which is what a tax can give, and it's also very simple. So when they're trying to invest, they need to... It makes it much easier to plan investment into clean technology if you know what the price is going to be, and a tax will give you that. Now, if you're going to have one and you're going to have an awful lot of heat on your head, why not get the advantages of it and explain those advantages, which, compared to an ETS where it's much more complex and the price is far more volatile.
Well, the reason they would say is because if they had a tax for 10 years, they would have no way of guaranteeing that they'd meet their target.
Well, you can, because you're not going to... The price is not going to deliver your targets either way. And in either way, you have to buy in permits from overseas to make the ETS work, and you could do that with a tax.
But in terms of international credibility, it would be very difficult for them to go out there and say, yep, sure, we're absolutely going to get to our targets if they had a tax as their only mechanism.
I think you could, but anyway.
Well, a lot of things, strong things were said during the week, but some of them are just fabricated along the way. Here's Barnaby Joyce.
By reason of what she's done, how she's misled the Australian people. But, it's a female impersonation of Mini-Me's father, Dr. Evil. Obviously, a referral to Dr. Evil is a ridiculous analogy to give spice to your interview, David, so they don't go and make a cup of tea and turn us off.
So there you go. Now, it wasn't all one way, of course. Julia Gillard gave as good as she got. There was quite a return of serve in the Parliament at one point. We'll have a listen to that.
I say to the opposition, the Australian people are better than you are. They are far better than you are. They are confident people who are rejecting your race baiting. They are confident people who are rejecting your playing the politics of greed. They are confident people who are rejecting your one nation policy agenda.
The Prime Minister accused members on this side of the House of a deeply offensive and untrue political tactic, and she should withdraw. For your benefit, Mr Speaker, it was a low and contemptible charge, that of race baiting, and she must withdraw it.
If it assists the House, I withdraw, and I say to the opposition, they should reject the political tactics of Cory Bernardi. They should reject the politics that their shadow minister wants to play with Greek. They should reject the One Nation emails that lead their economic policy.
Now, is that a deliberate strategy on her part to sort of inject some passion into the whole debate? Because it runs the risk, of course, if Parliament looks like it's in disarray, that reflects more on the government than the opposition.
I think Julia Gillard's trying to give back as good as she's getting. I think probably if they're going to run the line that Tony Abbott's pushing it too far, saying something like that doesn't help their cause, even though, of course, Tony Abbott did himself say that a couple of his parliamentary secretary and his minister in a couple of occasions went too far. So he's said they went too far in that debate, but, she probably over-egged it a bit there.
Well, that was day 5 of a pretty ferocious assault from the opposition, where she was called a liar every day, and the government was accused of just about everything. So I think Julia Gillard's frustration is understandable, but also I think Julia Gillard understands that the suit she's got to play in response to their carbon tax charge is strong leadership, and that's what she's been trying to do.